So how okay, so I want to talk specifically about what is going on with the process right now with what Trump is doing and kind of your perspective on this because I think that this is something a lot of people are interested in. So essentially my understanding of what has happened is that obviously Ruth Bader Ginsburg died. I actually have a pretty simplistic view on what the roles and responsibilities of people are here and maybe I'm too simplistic, but my layperson's perception is that it is the job of the President of the United States to nominate a replacement. It is the job of the Senate to vote on that replacement and either vote yes or no. Am I wrong?
No, you're 1,000% correct.
What then? Why is this? Why does this keep coming up? This came up with Merrick Garland. I'm sure it came up before then, where all of a sudden, depending on what side you're on, people are saying no, Trump shouldn't be appointing a judge, or Obama doesn't have the ability to nominate someone in an election year. Where did all of this come from?
Oh, okay. I can answer that. Where this all came from, and you might be aware of this already. And I'm saying this as somebody who's not partisan. I'm politically independent. I have issues with both parties.
As do
but
I.
It actually began with Joe Biden. Do you know this story?
Oh, I don't know this story. Tell me the story.
In 92, I want to say it was, prior to the appointment of Clarence Thomas, it was an election year, and Senator Joe Biden said, we have a Republican president, we have a Democratic Senate, it's an election year, we should vote for the election before a Supreme Court justice is appointed. This started with Joe Biden in 1992. Now, it then laid to rest. It was ignored. George Bush Sr. Nominated Clarence Thomas, and they had what was the ugliest confirmation process until Kavanaugh a couple years ago. So it was ignored, but it was first postulated. The idea was first presented by Joe Biden in the early 90s. And then it rested until 2016 when Mitch McConnell resurrected the idea of, and I don't know if it was, so in the past, if you're going to say that this time is different, that would be one of the key things, which was we should wait for an election when we're a year or less away, when we have what they call a divided government. One party controls the Senate, one party controls the White House. I think that's a really bad idea because you're already beginning to politicize the Supreme Court when you do that. So I think it was a horrible idea, even on those grounds. But you're absolutely right. The Constitution is very simple. As soon as there's a vacancy, the president nominates somebody, and through advice and consent and ultimately a vote of the Senate, that nominee is either voted in or rejected. And it is that simple. Mm-hmm. And it's the politics that people are getting hung up on right now. It's the hypocrisy of both parties. It's the hypocrisy of the Republicans who made this an issue 4 years ago. And it's what the Republicans are saying now was what the Democrats were saying 4 years ago, and vice versa.
Yep.
So I can understand the Democrats' outrage with the hypocrisy of the Republicans, but the sort of natural manifestation is that they then too are being hypocrites.
Yes.
So the hypocrisy is full bore. It's across the board. And this is what happens when you politicize the Supreme Court process. Let's just not politicize it. Has nothing to do with, it shouldn't matter what party is in power of any of the branches. That's completely irrelevant, which is why you won't find that in the Constitution.
Yeah, exactly. And this is the argument that I have been having with Republicans for the last several days, because they keep trying to tell me that that when the Senate decided to not even vote on Merrick Garland, they were not giving their consent. My position is that you could have had a vote and people could have voted no, and you still would have been doing your job. But by not voting at all, they did not do their job.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I was really sickened by what the Republican Senate did at that time. Well, for one, because it was just obvious it was going to come back to haunt them sooner than later for that reason. But also, it was just a clear, again, these things go round and round. the Democrats kind of cast themselves as being the constitutionalists in like the 60s through the 80s. And then during the height of the Iraq War, they did the same thing. And then in other times, it's the Republicans and the conservatives who cast themselves as the constitutionalists. And that includes in 2016. And I asked a lot of Republicans I know, how can you constitutionally defend this? You're supposed to be the constitutionalists, and you're subverting the constitutional process right now. And not when the election is 6 weeks away, but when it's a year away.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think the reason that they did that is because they knew that if Merrick Garland had come up for a vote, enough Republican senators would have voted yes because he was eminently qualified, right?
Yeah. And can we just briefly talk about the nomination process?
Please.
As well?
Yeah.
Because I don't know if this is very well known. Did you know that there weren't really judicial hearings? So there's the nomination, and there's the vote. And in between, we have the judiciary hearings, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know when those began?
When?
With the advent of television.
Of course they did.
Of course they did.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying there were no hearings, but they were generally behind closed doors. I mean, there was a written record, so it was of public knowledge. But it's kind of similar history with the State of the Union address. Okay, President Washington and President Adams both gave a speech for their State of the Union, but from Thomas Jefferson forward, there was no speech. There was no State of the Union speech because Thomas Jefferson hated public speaking. He thought all of his sort of thoughts should be transmitted through the written word, and he just didn't like it. And so he would just write his State of the Union address and send it to the Congress, and it'd become public record. And that was actually how it was for a century. And then in the early 20th century, right around the time we begin to have motion picture, Woodrow Wilson brings back the idea of giving a State of the Union address. Now, I think a State of the Union address is probably a good thing for the Republic, since we do have audio and video. But it's similar to this Supreme Court hearings that there may be some good that comes out of it, but you can tell that the fact that these hearings became a thing with the advent of television, you suddenly realize that there's grandstanding involved in the motivation.
Mm-hmm.
That reminds me, can I ask you about something?
Sure.
I watched I think it was your just immediate thoughts that you did on video when you heard the news about Ginsburg,
yes.
about her death. And I know that it wasn't, I think you made very clear in your video that it was a rant, that it wasn't planned. You were just kind of getting your thoughts out and organizing your ideas. So I understand that. Mm-hmm. But you did say something that kind of caught my attention. I wanted to ask you, which was, and I think your point was a very good one, because you said something like, can't we just have the weekend to kind of mourn her passing and to be Americans and just, a public figure who's been important to our government and to our culture has passed. Can't we just have the weekend? I really liked when you said that.
I would have taken it like an hour or two.
Right. Okay. But you said, but then you went on Twitter and you couldn't believe, all of the toxicity. My word, not yours, but that you weren't a fan of what you were saying. And to me, it's kind of like, what do you expect from a pig but a grunt?
Oh,
it's but
yeah,
I don't bother with social media generally to begin with, but what did you expect to see, or let's put it in the most ideal way possible, what did you want to see on Twitter? Because to me that was not surprising at all, that you're not going to find high-minded discourse.
No. And I would agree with you. I was not remotely surprised. In fact, that was one of the reasons that when I found out about her death, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be an absolute nightmare. People are going to be losing it. I guess I should distinguish between, and I appreciate the question and the opportunity to address it. I distinguish sometimes between what I expect will happen and what I think should happen if people were living up to frankly, the ideals of America. And those
Yeah.
are two very different things.
For
Now,
sure.
what I expected to happen was exactly what happened, which is, we'll take, it's at my microphone. Sorry, guys. We'll take Chuck Schumer, for instance. Chuck Schumer, before he even said anything to honor the life of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, tweeted something political about Republicans or Trump not filling the seat. I don't remember exactly the words, but his first comment was entirely political. And then on the flip, and that was basically, I mean, that was what was going on the left. Is everyone was losing their mind, like, oh, Trump can't do it, 2016, Merrick Garland, all this stuff. And then on the right, you have people, I mean, blatantly demonstrating hypocrisy if they agreed with what happened in 2016, saying, fill the seat, fill the seat, fill the seat. And I was just like, you know what? Like, I don't know how we can possibly heal the division in our country in any tangible way if people can't just take a minute and say, you know what? I may not have agreed with her, but she made a contribution to America. And that is something to be respected. She lived a life of service. I mean, I think, being on the Supreme Court it's a service, right? And I think that should have been respected. Now, was I surprised it was not, especially in the land of Twitter, which is, not real life and is generally an awful place to be? No, I was not surprised at all.
Right. Right.
So do you think that reaction, I mean, just looking at that, obviously the founders did not have, Twitter back in the 1800s, but I mean, is that sort of reaction kind of typical for what happens when a seat opens up?
No. I mean, it's only in the past handful of years has it become like this. It's what I will say to people who are, this is to people on both sides, if you will, as well, that if you're not respecting the process, and the process is the constitutional process that you mentioned, the president, nominates somebody and that person is voted up or down by the Senate. Everything else is a disrespect to the process.
Yeah.
And it's the left generally over the past several years who have shown themselves to not care about the process, who've wanted to subvert things like the presumption of innocence and to subvert due process. Don't become like the people that you have condemned by not giving respect to this process. Mm-hmm. And that's what I'm saying. And it's Democrats and Republicans, maybe some are more hypocrites right now than others, but it all comes out of this politics before process. And that's the problem right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So just to kind of put a fine-tooth point on it, you as a historian who understands these things better than many of us, thinks that Trump is completely within his job description to nominate someone right now to the Supreme Court.
Well, it's not even a legal question. It's just a matter of fact that he is completely within his constitutional authority to do that. Mm-hmm. People can debate whether he should, but the law and the Constitution, that the law kind of works from, is clear. He's completely within his authority constitutionally to do that.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things I really respect about Trump, too, is we know exactly from the list of who these nominees are going to be, because he's already said, I mean, I suppose he could make a different decision, I suppose, but he was very transparent before he was elected. He says, these are the people that I have on my list for the Supreme Court. He's already got another list, I guess, planned or released at this point. Is that something that presidents typically do very transparently, or is this kind of an anomaly?
That was maybe his smartest innovation in 2016. I think it's why a lot of people who wouldn't have otherwise voted for him did in 2016, was because of his position on who he was going to nominate for the Supreme Court. I think in some ways conservatives in that way had more the long game in mind than maybe some Democrats did. Yeah, to my knowledge, no other presidential nominee had done that. Mm-hmm. And I think it was very smart of him. And I think it's why he did it again. And no matter what one thinks of Trump, whether they support him or not, I think just as a matter of sort of historical fact, I have issues with his nomination of Kavanaugh, and it's not over the controversy. In fact, my problem with the whole Kavanaugh hearings was that I thought there were completely legitimate legal reasons to reject Kavanaugh, and the Democrats didn't go that way because those reasons would have been that he's too okay with sort of overwrought executive power. He proved himself to be way too cozy with aspects of the Patriot Act and things like that. And those would have been really legitimate ways to go after Kavanaugh because it would have been on constitutional matters. And Democrats didn't do that because, I mean, when their person is the executive, they want that person to have all that power. So they're not going to do that. Anyway, I think what's beyond dispute is that maybe the greatest thing that Trump has done as president, and this is a nonpartisan sort of observation, is his nomination of Neil Gorsuch. Gorsuch,
I like Neil Gorsuch.
Is an amazing justice.
Yeah. I liked him from the very beginning, even back when I was like, vote blue no matter who. I hated Trump. I was like, okay, Neil Gorsuch is like not that bad. Like, I'm cool with Neil Gorsuch. Tell us about him.
Well, he's just wonderful. He's really good on free speech matters. He's really good on anti-authority matters. And his record, if there's been a dispute, say between an authority figure, a government official, or a cop, and somebody who was at the hands of that authority, he has always sided with the citizen over the government official. He's very good on those matters, and he's actually very close. In those ways, he's very close to people like Sotomayor on the bench. Mm-hmm. And those two, again, you would think these two are completely apart because one was appointed by Trump and another was appointed by Obama. But in fact, those two are really good civil libertarians. They care about the individual rights of people in this country. So yeah, Gorsuch is probably, in my view, one of the undeniable accomplishments of the Trump administration. No matter what else happens, Gorsuch was a phenomenal pick in my view.
Mm-hmm.